War II. And I had been doing a lot of research about what he had done, because he never talked about what he had done, like most men who fought in World War II. Very, very, very rarely. And so once he died at the age of 70 in 1992, which I find very young, because I'll be 70 soon. And so I really wanted to know, what did he do for those 5 years? That was 25% of his life at that time, because he went to war at 17.
Nan, it's been a request to possibly use the mic.
Okay.
I know we discussed the reverberations. Can we try it for a little bit?
Yes.
Does that sound good?
Yeah.
Okay, is that better?
Yeah.
Is that better? How's that?
Do it better for your testing.
Try to.
Try now.
Okay, how's that?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So my father did have a lot of photos from World War II. He had a photo album that he took of his service in the United States. And he also had a large cardboard box full of loose photographs. And I think probably a lot of people have those cardboard boxes full of loose photographs in their attic, which is not a good place for them. So he was from Emporia, Kansas. And in high school, he was a very good musician. He played the trumpet, and he played in the city band, for which he made $1.75 a week. And he also played in the National Guard for $1.75 a week. And he played with all his buddies. They were all musicians. And he started college with them at Emporia State. But the National Guard was called up by Roosevelt to start training. This is a year before Pearl Harbor. And they were sent to Arkansas for this year of training. And then when the year was up, they were all ready to go home, and they thought that was going to be it. But Pearl Harbor happened a week before his 1 year of training was up. None of them could go home. They were all put on trains, and they were sent out. They weren't told where they were going. As far as they knew, they were all going to different places. They all ended up, this is Fort Ord. This is one of my father's photos. They all ended up there, and they were sent in different paths because there was such fear of attack on the West Coast. And that's what they were doing on the West Coast. They were there in case of attack. So he had a whole album he put together because he was with all his buddies. Everybody, he put the name of everybody, he put locations, and he showed us as children. But we really didn't have too much interest. We just liked the funny photographs. So this is actually a 5-level of hammocks.
Oh.
It's hard to see the person on the top.
Yeah.
So this is pretty much all I remember from looking at his album. But since then, since I've been researching World War II, I now know why they were doing this. It wasn't just for fun, but they were not housed at Fort Ord. They stayed in tents up in the hills of Monterey, because of fear of attack. They thought the Japanese were going to come bomb Fort Ord. So after my father died, and after my mother died, all the photos came into my possession. And I went to his hometown of Emporia, Kansas. I took all the photos, I took a whole suitcase, and I showed them to my uncle. And he knew a lot of those men who were still alive. And I realized that I should do something to share these photos. I did a search on the internet of his battalion, and there was nothing, which is really surprising. When you search something about World War II on the internet, there's usually so much. So I decided I had to make a website to share these photos, in hopes of finding some men who were still alive, and also for their children. So I made it. I started hearing from children of these soldiers. And one man I talked to was Dennis Weil Jr. And his father had been the photographer for the unit. And he sent me this panoramic picture of the battalion. This is the headquarters battalion which his father was in and my father was in. And I just couldn't believe that my father would be in a photo like that. It just seemed so unlike him. But I looked at every single face, and there he was. I also have gotten his medals. I don't remember ever seeing these medals in the house, but my brothers remember them. And this kind of shows how my father felt about his wartime experience. My brothers were allowed to play with the medals, and they probably just lost them throughout the neighborhood. But you can get the medals again. This is the address to contact, and it takes probably 6 months, but it's pretty nice to have these medals. They each come with a little ribbon pin also, and most soldiers will just wear the little ribbon that matches this. But this is my cousin Jay here, who's filming me. He and I went to the anniversary of D-Day, the 65th anniversary of D-Day in Normandy, and we saw these men wearing all their medals. And I think they were mainly British veterans that we saw. And so one picture I found very interesting in that cardboard box was this one, which you recognize as the cover of my book. And I knew that my father had been stationed in a town called Weston-super-Mare because my mother said that he liked it there and the people were really nice. And it had a name written on the back, but I found out later it was the wrong name. And there were other pictures I looked at, and I realized this was the same woman and the same man in the other picture. And I could not tell what they were doing. That's my father in the picture. It kind of looks like he has a gun to her head. But that's not what's happening. These people they had a dairy, they had cows, and they had ice cream, which was very rare during the war, and he is feeding her ice cream. And then there was this photo, looks like my father to his buddies with dates, and they're the two women from the picture. And so I had been communicating with Dennis Wilde Jr., and one time I was talking to him on the phone, and he said, "Oh, I talked to my dad yesterday." And I said, "What? Your father's still alive?" Because he acted like his father wasn't alive. So then I started communicating with his father, who was very much alive, very good with internet and sending me messages, and really interesting to talk to. He gave me the picture of this girl, and that was the entertainment that night. They were at the Winter Garden in Weston-super-Mare. And so Dennis Wilde took this picture, and also the picture of the girl. I tried to find out who the girl was, but I contacted the Winter Garden, which is still there, and they don't know who she is. But I haven't given up. I also contacted the Historical Society in Weston-super-Mare with that photo, with several photos, to see if I could find any of these people. And I got an email back, and she said, well, it's very unlikely, it was a long time ago. And then I got another email right after that. Her husband had looked at the picture, and he knew the women in the photo. One had been his horseback riding instructor, and they were still living in the same house. So she wrote to me, and here's an excerpt from the letter. And they had met my father when her mother decided to invite some of the soldiers for lunch on Christmas 1944, which was a common thing to do in England. The poor American soldiers had nowhere to go. And so they had about 4 or 5 soldiers over for lunch that day, and they really liked my father a lot. They continued seeing him. And she invited me to come and visit and stay at the house. So my cousin and I went there that spring. It was the summer of the 65th anniversary of D-Day. And so I used that photo for the cover, and my publisher colorized it. And it's interesting in this photo what the young man is wearing. He's wearing a double-breasted suit with cuffs. And during the war, clothing was rationed along with many other things, and things that you couldn't have in your clothing. You couldn't have a double-breasted jacket because that wasted fabric. It's just a waste of many layers of fabric. You couldn't have cuffs on your pants because that's a waste of fabric. But men in Great Britain were very upset that they couldn't have cuffs. I'm not sure why, but finally they got their cuffs back. So a lot of people just wore their old clothes. So that's what he's doing. He's wearing an old suit. But in the 40s and before, people didn't have as many clothes as we do now. Like, I'm sure I never have to buy clothes again. I have so many clothes they're probably going to last me the rest of my life. But people didn't have as many clothes then. Their clothing was not outsourced to the Middle East, the Far East, where people are paid very little to make it. It was usually made within the country. And the wool in their garments was probably from sheep from Great Britain. There was some shipping of products. For example, silk was shipped from Japan or China. And all that shipping stopped during the war. And all the manufacturing of clothing for civilians pretty much stopped because everything had to go for the war effort and to outfit the soldiers. Even tailors were hired to work for the military. Even small tailoring shops were working making uniforms. And some people had very, very few articles of clothing when you think about the whole world. I interviewed a woman from the Philippines, and she was a teenager during the war, and she only remembers having one dress and wearing it every day during the war. And I asked her, well, didn't you grow? And she said, no, she really didn't. She didn't have much to eat, and she really didn't grow. So she just had that one dress. And I talked to a friend who is from Italy, and her father served in the war. And one story he told her was that when he was first going through the process of being enlisted, the men had to drop their trousers for some reason. And quite a few of them didn't have any underwear because they didn't own any. So clothing was much more expensive as part of their income because it was made locally. It was all made from natural fibers. So when Jay and I went to Weston Supermare, these are the two sisters from the previous photo, and they're standing in the same location. They've now built a gazebo. So there's that gazebo. And then here are Jay and I standing where the picture was taken. And this is the woman who was wearing the jodhpurs. And next to her is her sister-in-law, who was married to her brother, who passed away just a short time before we went to visit. So I went to see them twice, and I went back last summer also. Kath has passed away just last year, but her older sister, Sybil, is still alive, still living by herself, still remembering my father, Joe Turner, and telling me stories about him. So it was really nice to see her. And it's a fun town. It's a seashore resort, but it's kind of run down. But it's good in a way because many of the old buildings are still there. It's not all built up. So in starting my research, I interviewed the sisters and the sister-in-law. And one story that they told me that I heard over and over again, interviewing people and talking to people, was the inability, you couldn't buy clothing, and you couldn't even buy fabric. So people used anything they could find to make clothing. And Sybil told me that she wanted to have a new shirt for horseback riding. She taught horseback riding. They had horses, and she needed clothes for that. And she was probably growing as well. So she told me she had a shirt. She did have a dressmaker who still had worked for the family, who made her a shirt out of a nice brown tablecloth. And that kind of story I heard over and over again, using mosquito nets for wedding veils, using curtains for clothing, using anything they could find to make their clothing. So after we were in Weston-super-Mare, we went into London and stumbled upon these soldiers having a D-Day memorial ceremony at the Cenotaph Memorial in London. And these are all veterans who had been at D-Day, all British veterans. And standing on the sidewalk watching were their wives. So this is a great opportunity for me to talk to them and hear some more stories about what it was like during the war. So coming back to the United States, I realized I really needed to find people who hadn't been in the United States during the war, because we didn't really suffer as much as other countries did. There was shoe rationing, so people got rationing tickets for shoes. And the clothing was rationed in a way, but that was done on the manufacturer's side, so people really weren't aware of it. The manufacturers were given regulations on how much yardage they could use for a certain garment, how long a skirt could be, and other things so that they weren't wasting fabric. So this is the first woman I found in Davis. She's a French war bride. She lived near me. She's now 102. She's still alive. She still writes me cards. And so she married a soldier, and she shared with me the story of her wedding. And I heard many stories about weddings, because that was something during the war where you needed new clothing, you needed something special, and it was very hard to procure the right clothing, the food, the bridesmaids' clothing, the veil, everything was hard to get. So she borrowed a dress, which was very common. And here's her dress. I think it's so beautiful. It's all lace. And it looks fairly old to me already, from the styling, where the waist is, and just the kind of lace it is. So I showed it to some historians who agreed with me that it was probably like 1920, so it only would have been 25 years old then, or earlier. And she told me her sister wore the same dress when she got married, and her sister got married in the United States. So I asked her, can I see the dress? And she said it just disintegrated. It just didn't exist anymore. So that was another clue that it could have been a very old dress that she borrowed. So I kept looking for people to interview. This is a friend of my mother's, Ellen Coyle. She grew up in the eastern side of London, a very, very poor family. And she spoke often about her experience during the war, and has even written a book about what it was like growing up in London. And I used this picture that she gave me in my book. She knit as a child for the soldiers. And here she is, all her classmates, they're all knitting to outfit the soldiers. And finally, I got to meet Dennis Wiles Sr. He lived in Alabama, so I flew down there to see him. And this is the original panoramic photo. I've only found one other person who had a panoramic photo. It's on my website, and it's from Company B. And Dennis even had the names of all the soldiers, which is really great. And so he made a career of being a photographer after he was a photographer during the war. And there was a show of his wartime photos at Emory University a few years ago. So they have a lot of files. They have all the files of his photos and everything. And he gave me copies of a lot of them. And this is one I used in the book. These are 3 women who are land girls in Great Britain. And I use this book in my chapter about gender, how gender and clothing interacts. And so this chapter is mainly about when women started wearing trousers, because World War II was a time when women had an opportunity to be more free. A lot of them were working in factories, so many of them started wearing trousers then. But it was very interesting. One woman said she first got trousers in the 30s. She loved them, and she always wore them. Another woman in her 90s said never. And I looked at her, she had a skirt on, and I realized I had never seen her in anything but a skirt. But many of the women in the service were issued skirts, not trousers. And women were considered more correctly dressed if you had a skirt on. There were trousers, and women probably had them, but they were only for special activities like sports activities, tennis, not for most of the time, like now. This is my father. This is a photo Dennis Weil gave me of Joe Turner in Western Supermare. He's posed holding a dog. I think they had a good time in Western Supermare. I think my father's World War II career was pretty fun in the beginning. He went from Kansas to Monterey, then he goes to Western Supermare, another seaside resort. Although they were there from November through April, not so great. But I don't see any snow in this picture. And this is Dennis Weil. He's posed with the same dog and the same bicycle, which I think is pretty amusing. They were just kind of goofing off. So I have heard from a lot of soldiers now and their children. I've received a lot of pictures. And they all thought their fathers said, these are the photos my father took. And one woman even wrote a book called The Photos My Father Took. And actually, Dennis Weil took almost all those photos. And he told me that he made copies, and for side money, he sold them to the soldiers. And he made a point of telling me he purchased all the chemicals on all the paper. He didn't use military equipment. But I found that in all these stories I've heard, for example, I have a chapter about the black market. And one soldier I interviewed, even though he knew I was going to call him, he knew I was a friend of his daughter, he didn't want to tell me anything. He said, oh, maybe a cigarette here or there. But then he opened up and told me more. So I'm not sure if Dennis Weil really could have even bought chemicals. So I don't know if that's true. Another picture that really interested me was this wedding party. So there's my father. He was best man, standing with his buddy and the young bride. And I was able to get a copy of the wedding certificate, the marriage certificate, but I had to go to Western Supermare to get it. I had to pay 10 pounds. And they showed me the original book where my father signed as best man. I recognized his signature. So I've tried several times to find out who these people are, and I thought I have a chance because there are more people. There are younger people there, but I haven't been able to. Even though my editor's father even tried to find, my editor's in England and Bristol, and we do know that the bride was from Bristol. But it wasn't a total loss trying to find her, because I attended this World War II event, the Spirit of 45 weekend, and I met this organization called the War Brides Association of America. And there were some of the children manning the booth, and I asked them if they could help me find the war bride. They have a website, so I did list her on the website. But they also asked me to come to one of their monthly luncheons. And so I started to do that, and I did that for many years. This is the group of war brides in Northern California, and I've interviewed most of them. Some very long formal interviews that I transcribed, and some just conversations. But it was really an interesting group, and they had a lot in common because they all met American servicemen and moved to the United States, leaving their families. And it didn't matter if they were German, English, French, Australian, New Zealand, Japanese. They all get along so well. And the lunches were really nice, and there'd be a theme, and they'd all talk about stories about the war. Yes?
Are the flags representing where they were from?
Oh, they must be. That's a good observation. But I think what is the blue and white one?
Greece, isn't it?
Greece. Yeah, there were no Scandinavian war brides there. They also had national conventions. This all stopped with COVID, and they're all up in their 90s now. But I went to several of the conventions, and these women were 2 women I interviewed. They're very interesting. The one on the left is Chinese German. Her parents were vaudeville actors and performers and acrobats. So in her early years before the war, she was traveling all around Europe, Africa, and they were performing. But when the war started, her mother took her and her sister back to Germany, and the father couldn't go there because I think China was an enemy country at that time. I think that maybe that was before Germany was allied with Japan. But he could never get back to Germany, and she never saw him again because of that. And the woman in the middle is from Bavaria. She's a German war bride. And she had some really fun stories, mainly about her older sister, who was quite a character and pretty gutsy. And she told me about her older sister had to do work for the war effort. She was a young woman, but she didn't like it. She was working in a factory. So she got herself put in the hospital because she claimed she had a tapeworm. But in the hospital, she still had to work because she wasn't that sick. So she worked rolling bandages. And she was a very good seamstress. So she stole bandages, and she made bathing suits for herself and her younger sister. So I sent the story to Trudy, what I wrote, for her approval to make sure I got everything right. And she said she didn't want me to say she stole the bandages. Yeah. So I say in the book that she took the little scraps that would have been thrown away. But thinking back at that time, there wouldn't have been any little scraps they threw away because they kept everything. They would have kept the scraps for washing or drying, for cleaning. Like my mother used to cut up the old underwear. There wouldn't have been scraps. But that's what I said in the book. And then she told me another story about her sister that I start the book with. And her sister got a bunch of German flags. So this was after the war. So somehow the German flags were very, very cheap. And she took them apart and she made red dresses for herself and her sister. And Trudy told me it was very embarrassing to wear a red dress because people didn't really wear red dresses in Germany at the time. And one time she saw her sister walking around this bright red dress, and she had to act like she didn't even know her. She was so embarrassed. So most countries did have to ration. I'm sure some countries just let their civilians get by with whatever they could find. But most countries did have rationing programs. And there were a lot of posters, propaganda, trying to get the civilians to support the rationing, support the suffering, because it was for the war effort. And everybody felt very patriotic and wanted to do their part. So this is one of the posters, and it shows what happens without rationing. Somebody who's maybe first in line or has more money could take everything, and other people would be left with nothing. But with rationing, supposedly everybody would get a fair share. And this is a quote from a really interesting book about World War II. And the author said rationing was actually an equality of misery. But another thing that could have happened, another reason for rationing, was so that the black market wouldn't be so productive. And even a salesperson without rationing could jack up the price of something that was scarce. They could ask any price. But so it had to be regulated to try to have some fairness. And here's another example of a propaganda poster of waste helps the enemy. So here's Hitler drawn out of things that could be wasted. And the slogan about scarcity of World War II, use it up, wear it out, make it do, or do without, was very common. And everybody I interviewed seemed to know that slogan, have really memorized it. So civilians were really encouraged to make do with what they had, with the clothes they had already. And skills like sewing, mending, patching, repurposing, knitting, crocheting really came in handy. And there were programs that taught women, maybe women more well-to-do who never had to sew, they were all encouraged to take sewing lessons and learn to sew as well. I did a lot of my research looking at women's magazines from the era. So these are some from France, the United States, and Germany. And this is French Vogue. So it's showing knitting on the cover of French Vogue, and it's in the colors of the French flag. And I did a Osher class about my book, and one of the students, an older man, wanted to meet me because he was so excited about a scrapbook his mother made about her World War II experience. So we met, and she had kept very interesting things, but they were mainly about rationing of food and fuel. But I thought this page was interesting because of the shopping bag she has. And at that time during COVID, everybody was really encouraged to bring their own bag, and still are really encouraged to bring your own shopping bag so we don't use plastic. And the article is very interesting too. It mentions that coffee was not yet rationed, but they say at this writing. And they advise people to not buy more than 1 week's worth at a time, or to hoard coffee. That was another thing. People started hoarding things. Even when there was just a rumor about rationing, they started hoarding. And hoarding could actually bring around rationing. The article also mentions that pineapple was scarce because that was something that the army needed. And it also mentioned dehydrated vegetables were becoming increasingly plentiful. And I think that was something they were doing for the military. So this is a V for Victory shopping bag. This is from a French magazine, Ne jetez rien, don't throw anything away. And they really mean nothing. I think we don't really understand about not throwing anything away because we throw away so much. And I don't know if you can, this is a translation, and I think this was written before France had fallen to Germany. I don't think they could write this when they were under German rule, but it says, use in these sad times a quantity of things that you would have thrown in the trash during normal times. The wool of an old pullover found in a box, and that by some miracle the mites have not found, can serve. Unknit it, and to give it the look of being new, if it does not need to be washed, place the wool in a sieve for 10 to 12 minutes over a casserole of boiling water. This treatment will make your wool soft. Has anybody ever tried that? That would be interesting. When my mother passed away, she had been knitting a sweater, and the people where she was living at a retirement place, I think she was in a knitting group, and they asked me if I wanted the sweater, and I said I didn't. But then later I decided I made a mistake, I did want it. So I asked them if they still had it. They told me they had unraveled it, just like what people were recommended to do during the war, to use the yarn to make something else. So this is an example of fashion in World War II. So my book is really not about fashion. So I do talk about Dior's new look in the end. But fashion actually had to stop during the war. The definition of fashion is a style that changes. And if a style keeps changing and you have to go buy new clothes to stay in fashion, that is really bad for the war effort. So fashion was frozen in time, and it really didn't come back again until several years after the war. Dior's new look was in 1947, and it took some time for the industry to get back working, and for the suppliers to make the fabric and everything to get back in process. This is a very iconic picture of how women dressed during the war. So the skirt length was shorter than it had been in the 30s. The silhouette was more narrow. And much of the styling had to be eliminated as well. And these are some of the restrictions to clothing. The skirt length, even the height of a hem had to be lower. Every effort to save fabric. Pants had to be more narrow. Patch pockets couldn't be used because it's a waste of fabric. Most yokes on shirts are double layer. They had to be a single layer. If an outfit was 3 pieces, like if you bought a jacket with, for women, a skirt and a pair of pants, that you couldn't do that anymore because that was a waste. So for women during the war, it was very important to dress properly. And dressing properly meant you had a hat, gloves, stockings, and of course a girdle. And the 3 products that were rationed and in short supply that really had a negative effect on women looking proper were rubber, silk, and leather. So rubber, of course, is very important for your girdle. And rubber was needed for tires and many other things for the military. And at the time, there was only natural rubber, and it came from the Far East, which had been invaded by Japan. I didn't realize that on D-Day, Japan didn't just invade Hawaii, invaded many other countries too. And one of the countries where most of rubber came from was invaded. So it was very hard to get more rubber. Rubber was used for so many things that the military needed, like gas masks, life rafts. So the girdle manufacturers and underwear manufacturers were really in a bind because they couldn't keep making their products. But they launched marketing campaigns to try to keep their customers. Heaven forbid the women would just stop wearing a girdle. Then they'd just go out of business. So this is an ad for a girdle when the company is reassuring their customer that they can make girdles without rubber. So the decades before, they had not invented the process to use rubber for clothing, and girdles were made just with boning and lacing, like Scarlett O'Hara. The lacing pulled in the flesh. And this is another company, Spirella, talking to their customer about, don't worry, they know how to make corsets without rubber. And actually, the name Spirella was a name given to a process invented by a man in 1904 who invented a type of corset bone, a metal bone called a spirella, which was used to make their corsets. So they were pretty much experts in making corsets without rubber. So here is what the corset looked like in probably the early 1920s. But also in the ad, they emphasize, don't stop looking your best, even in wartime. Keep that girdle on. And this is one of my favorite ads by Burley. And they are emphasizing that women, it's very important to wear a girdle for women power. Whether you're working, you're in a factory, or you're just knitting. For the war effort, it's really important to wear your girdle to support your muscles, for strength. And this company, in another effort to stay in business, offered a service to their customers. They could send in their girdle for repairs, even to be washed, which I find a little extreme. I think you could wash your own girdle. So silk was another big issue for women because women weren't considered well-dressed unless they were wearing their silk stockings. So rayon had been invented and was used for stockings, but it just wasn't very good. It bagged, it didn't hold its form, so your rayon stockings would be baggy all over. They just didn't have the right look. Nylon was invented in 1939, and it made a fantastic stocking that women just loved. But unfortunately, the military needed silk, and when they couldn't get silk anymore, they turned to nylon. And once nylons had been invented, they were out in the market just about a year or two, before the military requisitioned the entire production of nylon in the United States for what they needed for parachutes and other equipment. Silk was also used for the military for maps. Soldiers were issued these silk maps, especially pilots, because they could wear it as a scarf, it would be warm, and if they landed in a body of water, it wouldn't just disintegrate. So it was an important thing. I remember my father had a silk map, but it was in the garage. It's just like thrown in the garage, and I think it deteriorated. So people used anything to make garments, and this is a wedding dress out of silk maps, and it's exhibited in a museum in England. Here's a close-up. And here's some underwear made out of a silk map. The women in Western Supermare told me that sometimes they were able to find parachutes for doodlebugs, which were small bombs. So these are small parachutes. And they said those were really good to make underwear. They used them for underwear. And they said another problem they had was elastic wasn't available because elastic was made from rubber. So they made their underwear with ties to hold it on instead of elastic. So parachutes were used for clothing too, and I think the parachute wedding dress is very famous. But this woman in Davis, she had a dress made for her senior prom out of her brother's parachute. And here she is holding it, and here she is wearing it. And the skirt was the hem of the skirt was the entire circumference of the parachute. And the hem was stitched with black thread. And so her mother made the ruffle in black also to tie in the color. And I noticed on the hem there was a stamp of the manufacturer of the parachute, Baldwin Manufacturing on Long Island. And there were a lot of campaigns by the government to have people turn in things they didn't need, like fat. Women saved the fat and turned it in for fuel, aluminum foil, just all kinds of things. And part of this was also their old silk or nylon stockings. So here's an example of a store where you could turn in your stockings. So the silk shortage started first when Japan invaded China, and the United States boycotted trade with Japan because of that. And then after Pearl Harbor, there was no trade with Japan. So Japan and China were the only resources for silk. And so women started drawing a line up the back of their leg to simulate the seam, so it looked like you were wearing stockings. So I've done that tonight. Not very well. It's really hard to do by yourself. I think you really need a friend to help you do it. And my mother told me about when she was in a sorority in college, and the sorority sisters would help each other draw the line up the back of their leg with an eyebrow pencil. And here's a gadget to help you draw it yourself. I have never been able to find that, but it looks like a good thing. Maybe you had to make it. And here's some more women with very nicely drawn seams, and they've also drawn the heel reinforcement, so it really looks like stockings. So it's not enough just to have the seam, you also need to have kind of the color. So women start using just anything to color their legs. So here are some college students in their sorority painting their legs with, I don't know what it is. Could it be iced tea? It could be anything to make their legs look like they have stockings on. So pretty soon, the cosmetic companies realized this was a new market for them, leg makeup. So they started making leg makeup. So that solved women's problems, well, one of the problems. Liquid silk stockings. Doesn't that sound nice? And you could even have it done in a department store. So these are women having their legs painted. I remember shopping at the Emporium in San Francisco, probably in the very early 60s, and walking in and seeing women up on a mezzanine, and I asked my mother what they were doing, and they were repairing silk stockings. Or maybe even nylon stockings. But I think it must have been silk because they were more expensive.
What does the sign no more ladders mean?
That's a run.
Oh, ladder is a run?
Yeah. It looks like a ladder.
It's a British expression.
This is a neighbor of mine growing up. She's wearing her wedding dress. She married her husband practically the minute he came back from World War II, according to her. But I guess she was dating during the war when he was gone, because this is her quote. She used leg makeup, but you had to be careful because it might get on your date's clothing. Sounds messy. And a lot of college girls wore bobby socks. And here's my mother. This is my mother in the front, and she's got bobby socks on during the war. Her older sister looks like she doesn't have the bobby socks. And one of my favorite solutions for the lack of stockings I found in this French magazine, to crochet your own fishnets, which I think that would be very, very hard and time consuming. You need really good eyesight. And I don't even think you can find that kind of yarn or thread to crochet something so fine. And then the wonderful nylon invention, 1939, it was exhibited at the 1939 World's Fair, and it was such a hit. But the military took it all, and here's an ad from B.F. Goodrich saying, "We borrowed their nylons to make tires for the Navy." And even after the war, it was still hard to get nylons. And this article said it wasn't until late 1947 that there was enough production to satisfy women. And then leather was a big issue. It was very hard to get leather, and then the military had to take it all. So in the United States, it was rationed. People were given ration tickets for shoes. Here's the book.
Free, or they still have to pay for
Oh yeah, you have to pay too. That's the problem. You have to get a ticket, you have to have a ticket, and you have to pay as well. A woman I interviewed told me her father solved the problem of her feet growing by just cutting out the toe of her foot, so she had more room.
Or shoot.
Yeah, I'm sorry. That would not have been said. But one good thing about the ration tickets is that you could trade them among your family. So if it was something that, like in this example, her father didn't need as many shoes, and she was growing, so she needed more shoes. And I also heard from a family that was, they were a little more well-to-do, and they would give their ration tickets to maybe a larger family who needed them, who needed more food. But there were ways to get around the rationing of shoes, like these Hirachis. In the ad, they're showing no ration coupon required. So that was a big selling point.
How, if it's steer hide, how could it not be required?
Well, maybe it was very cheap, or ends, or it's woven strips.
Yeah. It's not black market, it's not admitted as black market?
No, it really wasn't a ration. Maybe they were from Mexico. So here's a pair of shoes using straw for the upper of the shoe, and the sole is wood, which was pretty common. And these are some French shoes, and I think they're really attractive. The soles are wood, and they just use a little bit of leather on the uppers. The rest is canvas. So here are some other shoes. These are with leather and suede, but they have wood soles. And so the wood sole could be really loud and clunky when you walked. So one thing they developed was cutting. You can kind of see how the sole is cut. So it moves a little more. It's easier to walk in. Here's some more wooden shoes. So how is everybody feeling? Do you want to have an answered question and answer comment, or should I go on a little more? Okay. So now I'm going to talk about making do. Here's this poster again with the slogan, use it up, wear it out, make it do. And this is a sewing circle. So women got together in sewing circles, taught each other how to sew so that they could find new clothing. And it was fairly common to use feed sacks for clothing.
Oh.
For clothing. Flour sacks, chicken feed, rice, sugar, everything was shipped in a cloth bag. Before that, things had been shipped in barrels, but wood became scarce, so they started shipping everything in cloth bags. But they were just undyed, natural colors, often printed with the name of the company. And a relative told me that a lot of her clothes were made out of cloth bags, which she found kind of embarrassing. And especially if your underwear was made out of the cloth bag with the name of the company on it, and you showed your underwear at the playground, that could be really embarrassing. So it was a sign of poverty if you had to have your clothing made out of a feed sack bag. But it had been done in the 30s also because of the Depression. So the manufacturers of the feed sacks realized that there was a market for them. And first of all, they made the bag so that the label could be easily removed, just stuck on, not printed on. Then they started making them in colors, and then they realized that prints would sell well. So having a pretty print would help you sell your product maybe you had a prettier print than another manufacturer. So this is a photograph of a patchwork quilt, and these are all feed sack prints. And I think they're very attractive. They kind of have that 1930s look, 1940s look. This was given to me by a family friend. And here she is. It's not a very clear photo, but she's wearing a very stylish two-piece sunbathing outfit made out of feed sacks. And so this is a solid, not a print. And it was really common to trim your feed sack garment either with colored, contrasting, bias binding, or rickrack. And the fabric stores carried tons and tons of different colors of rickrack and cotton binding. Now you can't find that. Even Joann's has very little rickrack. But it was big business. And an older cousin of mine told me about working in a grocery store and how women would come in, and one feed sack literally wasn't enough to make a garment. You needed two. So you had to get two with the same print, unless you could be really clever and maybe combine the print and solid. And he remembered ladies coming in, and he'd have to move a lot of the sacks so that they could get the prints they wanted. And I remember seeing bags of rice in grocery stores with the pretty prints on them. So this is a 1940s patchwork quilt for sale on eBay for $139. And patchwork in the past was an economic way to make something. Take all your scraps from sewing, which you kept, and make something useful. Now patchwork is like a fashion item. It's totally changed. It's no longer a mark of poverty. So I mentioned in my chapter about gender, women in trousers, and it was really interesting to talk to women about when they started wearing trousers. And this is the famous poster of Rosie the Riveter. So when we think of Rosie the Riveter, we think of this image. This is a poster from the war, but it was made for a company. It really wasn't displayed nationally. This was the cover of the Saturday Evening Post, showing a very, very strong and powerful Rosie the Riveter. So women were portrayed wearing trousers mainly to work in a factory. Otherwise, they were advised to look feminine, look how women are supposed to look with your nice skirt on. And it also was considered very important to keep your feminine look, like keep wearing your girdle, because that's what the men are fighting for. When they think about the women back home, they don't want to think about some woman in baggy pants. And this is an article. This is from Good Housekeeping, and it's written by the men who worked at Good Housekeeping, advising women about you're wearing slacks. So they advised to wear utility slacks for utility jobs, and they advised dark colors. But they also said, only if your family approves. I think that means your husband. And this is a picture that was given to me by a neighbor who grew up in Salinas. And she grew up on a farm. And she had 3 sisters. They were all girls in the family. And they all worked on the farm, and they all wore trousers. Not her mother. Her mother never ever wore trousers. She considered that trousers were for loose women, and so she was against them. And this is an older picture, maybe from the 20s, This is my godmother's mother, and she's wearing denim overalls. Well, they had gone on a vacation at a dude ranch. They were from Kansas. It was very common to go on vacation in Colorado. So she wore the trousers to go to a dude ranch, and probably that was the only time she ever wore trousers. Another type of trouser that was acceptable was the siren suit. And the women in Western Supermare, they had to sleep in their basement for 2 years because their town was being bombed. And their mother made them wear these siren suits, which they hated, they told me. But a siren suit was a comfortable outfit you could put on, had a lot of pockets, you could store the things you needed. And it was something that Winston Churchill wore all the time as well. And I found these cartoons. This is a cartoon which ran for several decades, and it was about a woman named Tilly the Toiler. And so she changed as times changed. And the cartoonist also did a bit about what kind of trousers should you wear and how should you look. And he's showing the right and the wrong way of wearing trousers. He also did a comic strip. And in the comic strip one time, Tilly's mother is wearing trousers. And so she's very short and not well built. And she looks horrible in her trousers. And Tilly is shocked. So movie stars started wearing trousers. They accepted them earlier than most people. So they were an inspiration for women to start wearing trousers. And even high-end designers started showing trousers. So this is, see the trousers, the overalls on the left are by Edouard Molineux from 1938. But they really weren't accepted by women outside of the very high end. And this outfit is for the beach, so it's for something special activity. And so this is what American Vogue said about trousers. When you're in the country, when you're on war service duty, and they're prescribed wear, when you're busy at good hard work, if you're sure they're right, do wear them. If you're at all in doubt, don't. A skirt is never wrong. I know people now who don't even own women who don't even own a skirt. Should I end now? Hopefully there are comments or people can share. Yes?
Well, I enjoyed when my parents had both passed away, they had left a lot of letters and a diary from my dad during World War II. They were married in April 1943, and when my dad was, first he was stationed in the States, he was doing instruction, and my mother was still going to college, and she wrote him in great excitement that she got a new pair of shoes. And this was the first new pair of shoes she'd gotten in more than a year. She was tickled to death. Oh, they're Blizzard. They are just so stylish.
Wow.
She talked also about when Dad was overseas, and she had her first child, and he was rapidly growing as a toddler. She used the good wool suit jacket that she had to make a coat for him, and the jacket was somewhat worn, so she took it apart and reversed the wool and made that into a coat for Stephen, and that lasted him until he grew out of it.
Yeah, that was a very impressive story I heard often too, about turning, especially coats. Thank you so much. My father wrote letters home too, but when Jay's mother and my father were cleaning out their father's home, he found a packet of letters and he threw them in the fire. So, we don't know. I have one letter he wrote his best friend when he was first doing the year of training, and it's really hysterical. He used all these words I didn't know, and his friend had to translate them for me, and one of them meant hemorrhoids. But talking to his friends, I think he had several girlfriends. He could have even been engaged. And I think he also got a Dear John letter when he returned home. So maybe he didn't want my mother to know about he didn't know her during the war. They met afterwards, but that's the only reason why I think he threw them in the fire. Or they just weren't important. Yes?
Dan, what were some lasting effects of the war on fashion? Like, was there a pushback on pants in the late 40s and early 50s? Was there a different attitude towards pants in Europe over America?
I don't think so. So women were encouraged to go back into the home and to take up your proper role, which is being a mother and taking care of the house. And one reason was because the men were coming back from the war and they needed the jobs. It was actually kind of hard for men to get a job when they came back. And so they wanted the women out of the factories. And when you look at advertising from the 50s and you see women mopping the floor and doing house cleaning, they have these full skirts on and high heels. And so Christian Dior's new look in 1947, he started showing these very, very full skirts. And women loved it. They really wanted to look feminine again. There was a lot of protest in England because they were still rationed for a good many years after the war. And so they thought it was horrible to be wasting all that fabric. But I remember one British woman I interviewed said she just loved it. She was so ready to dress like a woman again. And Princess Margaret, she was allowed to go to France and get a Christian Dior dress made. And there are beautiful pictures of her wearing the dress. So I think a lot of women went back to dressing the way they had. And the new look really wasn't that new. It looked new. It's called the new look because a fashion editor said, oh, it's such a new look. But he actually was kind of continuing the style from before the war.
And one more question?
Yes. Thank you, Dan. I noticed I couldn't help but notice in all my parents' post-World War II photos, when people were out and about, there's no casual clothing. They were all looking very formal, like suits, dresses, like they're ready for anything. And all their pictures were like that whenever they were out of the house.
They dressed properly. And you see that in movies too, movies from the time. Even very poor people, the man would have on a nice wool jacket, what looks like a nice wool jacket to us today. So it became a casual world. I remember I was working at Macy's and we were starting Casual Friday and we were so excited. This is going to be a whole new market. We're going to be making twice as much money. And we had to give people instruction how to dress casually to go to work on Friday. But it really backfired. And we were making a lot of money, making nice wool jackets that retailed for $400, and a lot of people were buying that dressy kind of look to wear to work, and it just killed the industry. But now we have the casual clothing industry.
Well, two things are going to happen now. I want to thank Nan. Terrific presentation. So the two things that are going to happen, I'm going to carry some books back to the table just behind the couch that has our raffle items and get Nan set up because she has brought some books of hers if you're interested in purchasing them.
What are the prices?
Pardon me?
What are the prices
Okay.
of the books?
I have two prices. The book is $40, but my publisher, I mentioned I had some issues with them. I have misprints that don't have the color plates, and those are $20. So I have both prices.
So I'm gonna go ahead and get the book box and bring it back, and then we're gonna do the raffle. And if you've never been, we have probably 8 items in the back.